session. So first of all, we have, I'll give it a go though, Ethan. That's good to know. Thank you. So what I'll do is I'm going to put I know I said this last week, but it has been an absolute chaotic week. I will put the past exam papers, probably not the last one, but the ones before that. I'll put them up on the Canvas site so everyone can see. The lab manuals for Lab 3 are up. Apologies about the delay with that. I don't want to run things the way the unit used to be run, which was a little messy. So I'm clarifying everything with Jeff, Kerry, Ragad, and Maria, so that that way your labs are actually a lot cleaner compared to what it was in the past. Anyone who pulled out of the unit and didn't complete it but has tried this unit before might notice that the actual questions are a lot different. There isn't as many of them as well. So we're trying to get your learning to the point where you've got almost like a less is more thing, where you'd, instead of doing 50 questions on your labs and not really understanding any of it, would rather have ones that are bigger questions, which would be able to consolidate those things to you without just confusing you, if that makes any sense. Anyway, let's get into it. We've got... Oh, no, you're very welcome, Daniel. So I hope you guys have been enjoying it. Okay, so this is it, the respiratory system, right? So we're going through this in two parts. Now, as always, I'm going to skip through a lot of the stuff that I think is stuff that you probably already know. Let me, at any point, just stop and let me know. Remember, always go via the learning outcomes. Okay, just a couple of things here we want to focus on. So obviously the function of your respiratory system, you already know that anyway. That's basically to keep oxygenated blood moving around your body and have gas exchange. And obviously as well, your respiratory system has to, it plays a very, very important role in immunity and all that as well, in regards to pathogens coming in. Mucus is a massive role in that as well. And that's where you do need to know the difference between your upper respiratory system and your lower respiratory system. Your lower respiratory system starts at the larynx, and the upper respiratory system starts at the nose and ends at the pharynx. You do need, this is a really good image to have, and those of you who have already gone over the lecture notes so far would notice that I refer to this a number of times. Everything that's on here you do need to know, right? You should, and you should already know this anyway. This is pretty basic sort of stuff, but you do need to know everything that's on this image. This is a really good one to study. Just the basics as well. That's not hard. These things are just continuations of one another. You know, the pharynx becomes the larynx becomes the trachea branches out into the bronchus, all that sort of stuff. You need to know about your respiratory mucosa. The really important part is the lamina propria, and that's because it basically has some really cool features. It's got the mucosal glands, and what they do is they're going to basically be able to create a lot of that discharge that will allow things to get trapped, and prevent them from actually being able to enter into your body as well. That's all in the upper respiratory system. That does connect down to the lower portion of the lower part of the beginning of the lower respiratory system. And obviously that's one of the reasons why you cough a lot when you've got an infection in there as well. That's those mucosal glands getting trying to deal with all the inflammation and all that that's going on there. Okay, if you have a look at the cilia, play an important role here as well. This one here looks like your great-grandmother's carpet. Anyone here ever gone to, I remember my grandmother used to have an old rug. I just thought it was the most disgusting thing ever. But your cilia, when you zoom in on it, on a microscope, it actually looks like red shaggy carpet. That's really quite gross, actually, because that redness is because you've essentially got blood that's come to the surface of that area. So it's basically like you've got this dense layer of carpet. What happens though is, as you remember, that cilia, what it will do, I'll just move down here, the cilia will actually sweep everything across, which you can see my pointer on. can see this here. This cilia here, this mucosal gland, the mucosal cells here will secrete mucus out here and make this slimy, bloody sort of mess, which will basically move things up. It's not bloody. It's not blood, really. What it is you've just got, these are very, very thin layers. This whole area is quite thin, and that's why it's very easy to rupture if you cough too much and all that stuff as well, where you can kind of feel like you can taste blood in there as well. So you've got really, really thin epithelial tissue down here, and then you've basically got a blood that's risen to the top as well, and that creates a number of things as well. It doesn't just allows for greater temperature control as well. Remember, all what you breathe air in, one of the purposes is of your respiratory system is to warm it up as well, and it does that by being able to create a lot of that warmth, because there's actually it's quite a thin layer of tissue, which obviously allows for blood to be able to rise to it, warm the area up, and in doing so, it will warm the air up as well. One of the reasons as well why when we breathe, one of the best things that you can do is breathe through your nose, especially in really cold environments, and that's because essentially our nose will end up warming that air up. Keep that in mind next time you're shredding at the snow, that you probably want to be breathing it through your nose. As we mentioned here, it'll trap a lot of particles in the mucus. It'll warm and humidify the incoming air, and it stimulates your olfactory receptors as well. The other thing as well, I was going to say is, anyone who this is a really, really weird question, but if anyone here trims your nose hairs, you might be doing a bit of a disservice, right? I remember I lived with when I was a uni student, just like you guys doing my undergrad. I lived with a guy who was really, really vain, and he just always wanted to look as best as he could. And he used to do those things where you could get like these things where it's like wax on a stick almost, and you can basically put it up your nose, and you let it solidify and cool down, and then you just rip it out. It's like waxing your back, or the way people wax their legs, but he'd do it for the inside of his nose, so he didn't have any nose hairs. And I used to think to myself, yeah, you might aesthetically look really, really nice, but the amount of things that are going to be moving through into his respiratory system are pretty darn nasty. That's an odd fact. Feel free to share that story if you like. Okay, so here we go. Here's the beginning of our hero over here. So this is a side-on view of this person. So the pharynx. So you can see here the pharynx basically is this region around here. It's an extension of the nasal cavity. Nasal cavity goes down into the pharynx. This is broken up into 3 different components. Now, you don't need to know what they are. I'm not going to ask any questions about your nasopharynx, your oropharynx, or your laryngopharynx. I'm not going to ask you any questions on that, okay? With those of you who are doing more advanced units down the track, will learn a lot more about this. However, at the moment, there's way too much going on in this topic already as it is. Is everyone keeping up to date with the content as well, in regards to all the different terms and language and all that as well? Is everyone finding it okay? Yep. No, fantastic. Remember, shoot me an email if feel free to send some emails through, Akira. And there is a lot of learning by rote. I don't think anatomy and physiology is the most complex thing to understand. Don't worry, sir. We're going to have a full revision session about that in week 11 anyway. So don't stress out too much about it. The exam date is published now. You should already know your exam date as well. Okay, Shay. I'll look at what we've. You should have got an email on, I think, the Monday about the exam date. The exam timetable was released on Monday. From memory, I think ours is on the 6th. There we go. 6 at 2 p.m. Yep. I did have it committed to memory, so that's good. 6 at 2 p.m. everyone. All right. So Yeah, I was going to say in regards to your marks, Shay, I'll have a look at what else can be released. We release things only when every student has done them. So unfortunately, some of your peers have been getting special consideration for extended periods of time. So Maleka, you should have got an email from the with a link that will go to it as well. I don't get that email because I'm not a student. So yeah, there you go. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, uh, it will be specific for your units as well. Okay, so I don't get that email, so I can't access that. Sorry about that. It's a bit of a weird one. Yeah. So anyway, the labs are due. So can the lab 2 is due at the end of this week. So you should know that already because all those dates were actually posted at the beginning of the semester. Okay. All right. So the larynx, as you can see here, again, I'm not going to ask you to name really anything on this other than being able to identify what the larynx is, and that it basically has the glottis basically at the top, which will allow the actual your vocal cords to be able to articulate everything. I do expect you to understand that this particular whole area is supported by cartilage, which gives it rigidity and prevents it from closing in on one another. Again, you only need to know what the glottis is. This really is here just for your own understanding. I'm not going to ask you about to define the vestibular folds or the vocal folds or anything like that. So yeah, it looks pretty gross, doesn't it? This is what causes a lot of your language and a lot of your ability to be able to make sounds as well. And yeah, I just got a reminder then. Yes, so Shay, when you were asking about the release of marks, I'll have a look at what can be released. We only release stuff once every student has done it. So there should be a few quizzes. Lab 1, I should be able to release the marks for that. Now I'm very sure that all the people who had special consideration had it all in as well. But yeah, really sorry about that. Unfortunately, when we got 600 students, if you get a couple of students who get special consideration, it just drags it out for everyone else as well. And that's understandable. These things happen. And thanks for your patience on that, everyone. Okay, as I mentioned, this is really everything you need to know about the trachea. I'd like you to know that obviously the larynx moves down into the trachea, and the trachea basically is supported by these ribs of cartilage as well, and that they'll branch out into the right and left main bronchi. That's really about the extent of what I expect you to know with that. What else? So you need to know this. You need to know how many bronchopulmonary segments in each lung. Your right lung has 10, left lung has 8 or 9, depending on the person. Now, what you have over here is, again, you should be able to identify almost everything that's on here. Not very hard things to be able to remember, and you probably know a lot of this from your Year 12 studies. Those of you who did not do Year 12 biology, this isn't too challenging to learn. A little bit of terminology, but it's very, very logical. It just air goes through pipes branch out into your bronchi. Your bronchi then branches out into your bronchioles, which get thinner and thinner. It's very similar to the arterial system when you think about it. It goes from arteries all the way down to capillaries, right? Very similar when we're breathing. We've got everything that, except at the end here, instead of having capillaries, we have alveoli. And these basically will be the areas where we have all the action happening as well. And this is what I'm talking about in regards to the action. You don't need to know everything on here. You do need to be able to identify where gas exchange occurs. You should be able to identify a number of things on here based on the color coordination. In this case here, you should be able to identify everything that's red is arterial supply, and everything that's blue is venous supply as well. So blood coming in and then blood going out. Okay, so now basically what we also have here is, I'll just move on. What we also have here in the lower respiratory system are these three particular points that I'd like you to know. You need to know that bronchodilation and bronchoconstriction, what they are. Essentially, they are just causing a reduction to resistance to airflow or an increase to resistance in airflow. When we get an increased resistance in airflow, we basically restrict the actual diameter of the airway, and that basically can be caused from a number of reasons, mostly parasympathetic activation as opposed to sympathetic activation up here if you're with bronchodilation. Bronchoconstriction also is the main thing associated with allergies where people tend to puff up, and that's because histamine gets released as well. Histamine causes mass inflammation throughout the body, and you find yourself in a bit of a pickle. That's exactly what asthma is as well. Asthma is an excessive stimulation of the smooth muscles, which causes severe bronchoconstriction. Anyone here who gets asthma, that's kind of give you a little bit of an insight in regards to what's happening. It means your lungs are basically undergoing way too much stimulation on the smooth muscle cells, and then immediately what happens is histamine gets released, and you basically end up having a lot more puffiness associated with your lungs. And it's not just histamine, it's a number of different things as well. This is also linked, asthma is also linked to allergic reactions as well. And in this case, dust can trigger that, pollen can trigger it, all these numerous things where your body will perceive it as being a threat, even though it's not. Okay. And just know that that alveoli are connected with alveolar ducts, and alveolar ducts end at alveolar sacs. Again, that's all on that big to small sort of thing we were looking at before. Of course, over here again we've got the blood-brain barrier, the alveolar blood-air barrier, not the blood-brain barrier. What am I thinking? But basically, this is the money area. This is the area where everything is, where respiration is going to occur at your respiratory bronchioles. You got to know the lobes of your left and right lung. Your right lung has a superior, a middle, and an inferior, whereas your left only has superior and inferior. They have different shapes as well, and that's because you basically end up having different organs that are packaged around them as well. In this case here, your right lung, actually, which we present as the left because it's as if the person's facing us, is basically displaced due to the presence of the liver, which knocks around below it. The left lung over here as well also has it's indented on its medial area, which forms what we refer to as the cardiac notch. Cardiac notch is a really important part because that's basically where you're going to end up having that connection, which forms the connection for the cardiovascular system. This is a really good image to use as your summary. So we'll, as I mentioned, we've just gone through basically every component of this, and this is the one that you should print off, put up on your wall, and look at it, and get a little bit teary, tears of joy mostly, and read it before you go to bed as well. This is the one that you should also print out on a t-shirt and give it to your housemate or your sibling and say, wear this so every time we hang out, I'm studying about the upper and the lower respiratory system. If anyone does do that, let me know. Ooh, that's a good question. I'll look into the Swinburne budget, Shay, and see what we've got. Could be good. Could order them through Temu. It might not last. No offense to anyone who orders stuff from Temu. Some of my best friends order things from Temu. Are there any questions? Yeah, I know, that's right. Any questions, anyone, on that first component of the lecture? No, we got nothing? Well, if you thought that first part was exciting, well, part 2 is going to knock your socks off, I'm telling you now. So this is where we get into some really cool stuff as well. This second part is much easier to be able to remember, especially if you like a little bit of biochemistry. We do a very, very basic understanding of the way that gas exchange occurs in our body. Remember that you have to know the difference between external and internal respiration. External respiration is what happens to the lungs. Internal respiration is what happens when the oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange occurs in the cells. That's in the delivery point. This is what I'm talking about here. This is the money area, right? So if we've got our external respiration, meaning everything that's going on here, the midpoint is the transport of the gas in the red blood cells where oxygen is bound to hemoglobin. And then internal respiration is passing this off to the cells, collecting the gas, the carbon dioxide, so that it can go back to the lungs and be expelled out. You need to know that, and it's not very hard. Pressure is really, really important here as well. Inspiration and expiration is just the way we refer to inhalation and exhalation. Don't ask me why we actually refer to why we had to just come out with more terminology to confuse you even more. But yeah, in this case here, when you have inspiration, it's not because you saw a beautiful sunset or you saw you saw a dog on a surfboard or something like that. Even though watching a dog on a surfboard is very inspiring, in this case here, when you inhale, we refer to that as inspiration. When you exhale, we refer to it as expiration. And that's because the air is essentially expired air. Okay, there's a couple of things going on here as well. There's a number of ways we can breathe too. We can breathe basically autonomously, and we can also have what's called forced breathing as well. This is what happens here at rest. This is what's going on. Your diaphragm sits up. Your lungs here have the equal amount of pressure outside and inside. So the ratio here between the pressure outside or inside the lungs is equal. Obviously, this is never like this because we are always undergoing respiration. So what happens when we breathe? Well, when we breathe here, in this case here, when we're inhaling an inspiration of air, what ends up happening is a number of things. We have muscles that kick into gear, depending on the type of breathing you're doing though as well. But what happens is our diaphragm moves down, and what that does is it allows a greater surface area and opens up the lungs as well, right? The pressure will then decrease, allow a lot of that gas to come in. Then when we exhale, it's the exact opposite. Diaphragm moves up, puts pressure on the lungs, and basically spits the air out as well in the process of doing that. It's almost like an accordion where it's opening, shutting, and a lot of this comes down to the diaphragm. I remember I had a martial arts teacher who used to tell everyone, you got to use your diaphragm to breathe. He'd be really big on that. He was really big on the whole thing of like, oh man, it's all about breathing through your diaphragm. And I didn't have the heart to tell him that our diaphragm kicks into gear every time we do breathe. I do kind of understand to a certain extent what he was saying, though, because we have a number of. Is there any sort of summary or dictionary as we know all the words we need to know with the definition? No, Amanda, you're going to have to make your own. But there should be. In Martini, I'm pretty sure there's a glossary. There is in the hard copy. I haven't had a look on the e-text, but the hard copy definitely has a glossary at the end as well. But I think it's just better to make your own one. The way I would study these particular lectures is it might sound a bit environmentally unfriendly, but I would print out 6 slides per page or something like that, and just work out, make your own notes in regards to what the important parts of each lecture are. They're pretty short lectures, each topic, because there's really only about 20 or so slides, so it shouldn't be too hard to do. Yes, but it's just too many. I know. Yeah, I know what you mean. But the other thing as well, this might sound a bit old-fashioned, but there is truth in it, and there's evidence in it as well. There's been a lot of studies that have shown that when you actually manually write something out compared to typing it, you will actually retain that a lot easier with your, for some reason, it just creates a more solid neuronal sort of connection in your brain for your memory. So writing things out, nothing better than pen and paper, everyone. I know I'm not meant to say that because we're the University of Technology. Do you make the Quitch cards? I used to, for sure. I don't know, sorry. The Quitch ones. No, I don't do that. That's all done by the Quitch team. So that's just additional stuff for you guys. Okay, let's get on to it. So when we have your respiratory muscles, you have your what we call your primary muscles. That's the diaphragm and the external intercostals, but then the accessory muscles get activated when we need more forced breathing and all this stuff as well. Inhalation is always active. Exhalation can be active or passive. And what we say with that is that when we refer to active or passive breathing, we're referring to a number of ways that we can breathe. So there's quiet breathing and forced breathing. So forced breathing is basically where you are using a lot more of your accessory muscles, and that's to really push and drive that inhalation and exhalation. Think about it that you're out on the dance floor, you're giving it heaps on a Saturday night. You've got your best pair of strides on. You're giving it heaps on the dance floor. In that case, there you are going to go through a level of forced breathing. Quiet breathing, on the other hand, involves active inhalation and passive exhalation, and that basically means that you're going to be using your diaphragm a lot when you do deep breathing, or you're going to be using coastal breathing, which is rib cave movements during shallow breathing as well. So big breath requires your diaphragm. If you're just chilling out and doing nothing, then coastal breathing is just shallow breathing. It's very, 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 very subtle. And that is usually ribcage movements because your diaphragm doesn't need to be moving up and down a lot. Elastic rebound is what we refer to when everything coils up. Okay, a couple of things here. I'll skip past here. These are the things that I want you to remember. So you have a look at this in your own time, as you should have already. But these are the things, really important measurements that I'd like you to be able to remember. First of all, I'd like you to remember your tidal volume, the vital capacity, and the residual volume. Your tidal volume is the amount of air moved in during quiet breathing. It's usually about half a liter of air. The largest and the vital capacity is the largest possible breath with full expiration, and that's typically around half a liter off what you would need bringing in your tidal volume. And then that means that your residual volume is the amount of air that remains trapped in the airways after the full expiration, which would be half a liter. If you breathe in 500, you expel 4.5 out, and you're going to have a fair bit. You're going to have half a liter there. All right. So gas exchange occurs, as you know, between the blood and the alveolar air. You remember we've already talked about the blood-air barrier. A couple of things going on here as well, and let's get into it as well. You've got to know the basics of pressure here. This is really, really easy stuff, I know. My apologies if it's a bit offensive to some of you, but not everyone here has did Year 12 biology as well, so it does help to understand the basics of these things as well. Remember your basic gas law. Boyle's law is a really good example here. Gas under pressure will diffuse into an area where equilibrium is established. If we put pressure over here, so you think about your can of pop, it's all the gas is trapped in there, so it will equally distribute out into a concentration gradient, right? So it doesn't just stay all at the top or all at the bottom. It basically will be distributed around so that it's at equilibrium. The moment you pop that can of pop, then a lot of the gas will escape out, and basically due to the actual pressure. Once the pressure is decreased, the gas isn't under pressure anymore, and it can escape. Your lungs essentially do the exact same thing. Now, a couple of things that you need to remember about hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is the main component of red blood cells. Its role is to be able to transport oxygen out to cells and to peripheral tissues, and then be able to move collect carbon dioxide, take it back so that we can expire it out of our lungs. Couple of things to remember here. Hemoglobin, whatever gas it's bound to, is what we call it. Hemoglobin with nothing is just hemoglobin. Oxygen bound to hemoglobin is oxyhemoglobin, and carbon dioxide bound to hemoglobin is carbonohemoglobin. Basically, what happens with the carbon dioxide that's in our blood, particularly in our plasma, what will happen is, and in our red blood cells, is it will get converted to carbonic acid. Then it will basically dissociate it from carbonic acid. It will dissociate into a protonated hydrogen, which will normally go off and participate in other redox reactions, or if the body already has enough positive charged hydrogens knocking about, that'll go to the kidney to be excreted in your pee. And the bicarbonate as well is the leftover component. If at any point there's too much of either one of these, then the kidney will kick in and actually then take care of excreting whatever it is there is too much of. This slide here, Matt, this is getting a little too biochemy, I know, and I think the only thing you should remember here is this component here, and I would say these two terms here. I'm not going to ask you questions about carbon dioxide being converted to carbonic acid or anything like that. The phosphate buffering system is a fantastic thing to learn about. Unfortunately, it's not for this unit though. Anyone who does want to talk about the biochemistry of the phosphate buffering system, just let me know, and I'm there. I'm so on it. Okay. I used to teach biochemistry for many, many years while I was teaching anatomy and physiology. So it's stuff that is embedded in my brain. Okay, this is the really cool stuff here, right? So here we go. Here's the alveolar space. Here's your red blood cell. Oxygen goes in, binds to hemoglobin, moves over here, gives oxygen to the tissue, collects carbon dioxide to the tissue. Carbon dioxide is then converted into carbonic acid. Carbonic acid will then convert into will split into hydrogen and bicarbonate, which will then be dealt with through various recycling means by your body. Over here, the extra carbon dioxide that is still knocking about in your red blood cells when it returns to the lungs through the venous system. See the color coding here: red, it's arterial; blue, it's venous. That will basically be expired out and restore the balance. Again, you really don't need to know a lot about that. You do need to know about hypercapnia and hypocapnia. That's just elevated or depressed carbon dioxide. We have really strong receptors for carbon dioxide, and the reason being is that, like, if we can't detect carbon dioxide levels well, then basically we die, right? We'll internally suffocate. We do have receptors for oxygen, but they're not as sensitive for your carbon dioxide. That's because our body can deal with this a lot easier if we're getting too much oxygen. It can just reduce our breathing rate. We can faint. That's why a lot of people, when they hyperventilate, they can faint. If anyone here ever saw did anyone here ever see things where people will faint when they see when the Beatles came to town back in the 60s or something? I wasn't around then, by the way, but I'm pretty sure there are a whole bunch of people who fainted when Harry Styles came out and gave his concert, or Taylor Swift did, and that's because they get so pumped up, right? And we do see people, Michael Jackson, yep, MJ, like people would faint when they'd see MJ, right? They waited all their life to see MJ. People actually faint when we used to do on campus lectures. People used to faint, during the actual anatomy and physiology lectures, because they would get so pumped up that they'd be hyperventilating and they'd just calamity, and they'd just fall over. So that's the reasons why we do these lectures online now as well. Did everyone know that? It's because everyone used to just get too pumped up. Yeah, 100%. That's what I was told. Right, that's what I was told. I don't know. Remember, I only got here last year, so I'm pretty sure that was the reason why. I don't know if there's any validity to it, but to me, it makes sense. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I might have heard it from Martini. We were hanging out the other day. We went to a bar. Okay, so let's get back to it. Yeah, exactly. That's right. I told you, anatomy and physiology. So it creates so much hype. Yep. Oh, 100%. Always, if you come and go into an anatomy and physiology lecture, carry a paper bag, so you can, you might just get too pumped up, right? All right, what happens here when we have an increase in the amount of pulmonary CO2? Well, what will happen is basically again, you should be, these particular slides here are really good to sort of get a feel for the basics of what happens, right? So what happens is stimulus occurs, which is an increase in CO2. That's devastating for us, right? Not only for our respiration, but for our blood, our ability to be able to maintain that particular pH level of our blood is really, really important. So what happens here is basically your receptors pick up on this. Your arteries and medulla oblongata kick in there. They basically stimulate they essentially, this will get triggered with increased carbon dioxide or a decrease in pH. A decrease in pH because elevated CO2 gets dealt with, and then the waste product essentially causes a reduction in pH. That's because it's getting too acidic, right? Because you're getting too many of those proteinated hydrogens that are a byproduct of the actual breakdown of CO2. You don't need to know that. That's just a bit of an odd fact. The effector is your respiratory muscles get stimulated, and then what they do is they cause increased expiration of carbon dioxide, and that basically will restore the balance. What about the other way? The other way, when we've got low carbon dioxide, again, this is where you're getting too pumped up because of an anatomy and physiology lecture. When Greg came to town and walked into the anatomy and physiology lab and people started fainting everywhere. Well, I know it wasn't about me; it was because of the knowledge, right? It was all about anatomy and physiology. You guys are just fans for it, right? So when that happens, what will happen is your body, when you get too pumped up because of anatomy and physiology knowledge, and you end up hyperventilating, what happens is same receptors are going to pick it up, and that's going to just be the opposite in regards to your chemoreceptors will get inhibited by a decreased carbon dioxide and increased pH. So exactly the opposite as before. Again, the respiratory muscles get inhibited so that you can actually have that forced breathing not occurring, right? So again, we're doing everything we can here to actually cut back on that rate of breathing. So there's would knowing the homeostasis steps be something to revise? Or can't really say that. I think the homeostasis steps are really good so you can understand it. I can't really tell you if you should revise it. But yeah. So what will happen here, and just think about it logically as well, right? What happens here, understanding everything about what we talked about in regards to the mechanics of breathing, right? If you're getting too much oxygen in this case, what is the muscles that increase that breathing rate are going to be inhibited as well. That's going to cause a reduction in respiratory rate because there's going to be a bit more shallow breathing going on there as well, a bit more quiet breathing. And then that will basically increase arterial carbon dioxide. Breathing through a paper bag is one of the reasons why people do that. Do not do that unless you are hyperventilating, because one of the reasons when you do that is all you're breathing in is carbon dioxide. So you're able to restore that yourself when you're hyperventilated. Okay. What happens when we get old? Well, when we get old, if you heard me coughing a little bit today, I don't have a cold or anything. I'm just getting old. And what happens when we get old is the elastic tissue in our respiratory system starts to deteriorate. We basically get a number of things that can happen as well. Arthritis can actually kick in and restrict the chest movements and limit your respiratory minute volume as well. And emphysema, to quote Todd Flanders, smokers are jokers. And anyone here who's smoking, you've got to quit, because this is what's going to happen. You're going to die much earlier as well. So makes sense, right? You keep puffing away, and then eventually you're going to puff out. And you can see here, smokers tend to puff out, statistically speaking, much earlier than people who've never smoked. However, there is help. If you can stop now, your chances of being able to restore that is and expand your life significantly with a run of good luck that you don't get any other diseases is going to be vastly increased. You also, it's not only just death rate as well, it's the onset of age of disability caused by a decline in your respiratory performance due to being a smoker. I hope there's no smokers here. Yeah, I got nothing on that one. Nope. Good stuff. Good stuff. There's hope for the younger generation. Okay. Okay. Link everything together. Start putting it all together. Yeah, it's got you got a friend you're trying to get to quit. Yeah, it's the terrible thing. It's a terrible thing. They're just going to die eventually. They'll puff out, as I said. They puff on and then they puff out. All right, so start to link everything together here. I think this is a really important slide, just like it is with all the other ones that we do, what we cover in this, so that you can get a good feel for everything. All right, is there any questions at all? Because I'm going to have to run this same lecture at 10:30, and I don't want to puff out, as they say. So, has anyone got any questions about the content that we covered? No, fantastic. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in. I better preserve my laptop battery for the next one. We'll talk about